Fringe is an awesome sci-fi drama created by J.J. Abrams alongside the pair of Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci. It aired across 5 seasons and precisely 100 episodes between 2008 and 2013. We primarily follow a trio of terrific characters portrayed by a trio of tremendous actors. Anna Torv is brilliant in the role of Olivia Dunham. Liv is exceedingly courageous and intelligent, as well as extremely jaded, kind of traumatized, understandably so. Joshua Jackson is excellent in his portrayal of Peter Bishop. Peter is whip-smart, charming, and cunning. His initially very mysterious origin is one of Fringe's most fascinating and prevalent components, though unquestionably the greatest character in the series, and one of my all-time favorite television characters in general, is that of the endlessly complex Dr. Walter Bishop, brought to life by the impeccable John Noble. Walter has a genius-level intellect, and he is genuinely hilarious, and while he can so often be extremely endearing, he's also mentally unhinged, with a particularly checkered past, involving both experimenting on children, as well as being the sole cause of so much goddamn destruction, a result of his fulfillment of selfish desires. Now, Season 1 resides somewhere between really good and great. It is more so procedural than the superior remainder of the show, but there certainly are multiple serialized story elements present. That of the complex relationship between Liv and former Flame with questionable allegiance, the mostly deceased John Scott, the ever-intriguing Observer, as well as the elusive William Bell and the parallel universe. Some specific highlights of the 20-chapter premiere season include Episode 4, The Arrival, Episode 10, Safe, Episode 14, Ability, and Episode 20, There's More Than One of Everything. I was irreversibly hooked to this Observer storyline the moment Mr. Michael Cerveris appeared on screen. I love his peculiar cadence and very specific physicality. I've always dug the rather eerie confrontation taking place in the woods between this mysterious being and Peter, as young Mr. Bishop learns of the Observer's telepathic ability. The bald man is cryptically able to say each and every word that comes out of Peter's mouth in unison with him, with calm and complete confidence. The Arrival reaches its peak of intrigue when we learn through a couple quick but gripping allusions that both of the bishops have quite the history with the suited man. Episode 110 features an inciting incident that I've always found to be extremely f***ing cool. Safe opens with a very unique bank robbery, during which this group of criminals utilize a technological device in order to allow them to vibrate through a wall before one unfortunate thief becomes physically stuck inside of it. This entire illegal operation is in service of one of the show's greatest recurring characters, David Robert Jones, portrayed by the exceptional Jared Harris, who would go on to phenomenally play Professor James Moriarty in 2011's Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows. Harris also appears in episode 114, in which I thoroughly enjoy the tete-a-tete hero-villain relationship between he and Olivia. I dig the intense scene in which Dr. Jones puts Liv through a test of telepathy, through which we learn that Dunham possesses special abilities gained by the rather sketchy Cortexiphan trials conducted on her by Dr. Bishop when she was a youngster. Then there's the season 1 finale, which is nearly entirely based in lore/mythology-centric elements, fittingly ushering us into a new era of Fringe. Harris is once again a pertinent part of the piece, which is always a treat, as is the fucking badass and brutal moment during which Peter closes a portal as Dr. Jones is entering it, thereby teleporting half of his now mutilated body. We also get incredibly interesting and effective allusions to the fact that Walter's legitimate son is deceased, and the Peter we've been spending time with for an entire season was essentially kidnapped by Walter from another world. This particular plot point is, in my opinion, the crux of the show's brilliance. All of the material focused on it is Fringe at its absolute best, both creatively and emotionally. More Than One of Everything concludes with a simply awesome cliffhanger. Not only does Liv very abruptly and creepily find herself in the parallel universe within one of the still standing twin towers, we're also finally physically introduced to massive dynamic founder and former lab partner of Walter, Dr. Dr. William Bell, portrayed by late sci-fi legend Mr. Leonard Nimoy. And mind you, numbers 4 and 5 of the primary quintet of Fringe characters are filled by Astrid Farnsworth, portrayed wonderfully by Jessica Nicole, and Philip Broyles, played by the late Lance Reddick. Astrid is sort of the yang to Dr. Bishop's yin. The pair develop perhaps the sweetest and most wholesome dynamic in the series. She's so smart and patient and tolerant, while Reddick is typically stupendous, perpetually commanding the screen. Broyles is an intimidating hard-ass, though he truly does have a good, courageous heart. Season 2 is by no means peak Fringe, though it is undoubtedly a step up from the season previous. There are still episodic elements present, but it's clear that the series is progressively leaning more and more into a more serialized story structure. We instantaneously continue on from the previous episode's cliffhanger, while the second season's premiere raises the stakes in that a central character is killed off in Liv's now former partner, Charlie Francis, portrayed by Kirk Acevedo. The highlights of this 23 episode collection include number 8, August, number 16, Peter, as well as numbers 22 and 23, Over There parts 1 and 2. 208 is an exceedingly observer heavy episode, which is always just fucking aces for me. We delve deeper into the history of the observers as we get glimpses of these beings present at various significant points in human history. Yes, beings, plural. We discover that the Michael Cerverus observer is one of many. Episode 216 is widely and pretty sensibly considered to be one of Fringe's all-time greatest hours. It also truly alters the game in terms of a given episode's thematic introduction. Episodes 1 through 35 feature the same opening title sequence, which is visually simple and subtly impactful, scored by the magnificent Michael Giacchino. Peter largely takes place in the past, so both the intro's visuals and audio get this fun, synthy, retro makeover. This piece is consistently compelling and extremely revelatory. The 80s events that occur have been intriguingly alluded to throughout the show up until this point, and Peter beautifully depicts them, expands upon them. This marks the first time we're witness to the dichotomy between Walter and his doppelganger, nicknamed Walternet. It is gripping, viewing these two men's coinciding brains at work, while John Noble absolutely kills it in these dual roles. We even witness the event that took the arm of Blair Brown's Nina Sharp, massive dynamic second in command. The two-part season 2 finale is bloody awesome. Forget a toe dip. We are thrown right into this parallel world with no warning. We're given great pacing, fun action. Not to mention, we get the brilliant and banter-filled dynamic between Walter and William Bell. We get the kind of return of Charlie Francis and the introduction of the charismatic Lincoln Lee, portrayed by Seth Gable. This exciting two-part tale concludes with a wicked cliffhanger consisting of a covert switch of the two Olivias, which perfectly sets up a particularly epic third season, potentially the ballsiest season of TV I've personally experienced. There's a multitude of bold creative choices, the vast majority of them sticking the landing. Speaking generally, we split our time between our prime universe and this parallel universe, so there are basically two different storylines occurring simultaneously, starring two alternate sets of series regulars. And I really appreciate the fact that our hand isn't held through this multifaceted narrative. The writers provide you the necessary tools for comprehension's sake, but it's the viewer's job to pay close attention in order to keep up with the unapologetically wild, coinciding / overlapping stories. While we get a taste of our original characters' alternates in the second season capper, that particular concept is essentially the entree of season 3. So much of the success of this hook is due to the brilliantly contrasting performances given for both versions of a given character. Our Liv is stoic. I mentioned her kind of jaded nature. Olivia is more so bouncy, naturally flirty, more so morally gray. Prime Astrid is exceptionally personable and supportive, comforting. Alt Astrid is socially inept, completely rooted in numbers and facts and screens. Unlike that particular pair, we were introduced to the other Lincoln prior to meeting our world's version of him. While Alt Lincoln has a swagger about him and is charmingly snarky, Prime Lincoln is kind of timid, awkward, a bit of a nerd, though my favorite doppelganger, to which I briefly alluded earlier, is unequivocally that of Walter and Walternet. While the deliberate and clear-cut surface level differences are wonderful and so impressive. Our Walter is quirky, unfiltered, quite unpredictable, as well as physically kind of hunched and meek. The other Walter is stern and stoic. He's confident, with a gravitas about him, sporting a more so professional, verging on presidential look. It's the dichotomy of these two psyches and hearts that is particularly captivating. A lesser show would have made this a basic good versus evil scenario, but in multiple ways, the other Walter is less morally askew than our kind of lovable Dr. Bishop. We're inherently drawn to Walter in this debate because we've spent so many episodes getting to know and love him. We've seen him at his most vulnerable, and we've watched him develop really special relationships with Peter and Astrid, for example. But we must remind ourselves that Walter is responsible for bending reality to his will, which had cataclysmic after effects. Walter also experimented on innocent kids, while we actually see Walternate refuse to do so. Walternate is more overtly vindictive, though understandably so. It's caused by Walter, whose selfishness, general emotion, and hubris made him blind to the horrifying damage he could and would cause. It's just so well crafted, especially considering the fact that Walter is sort of positioned as a protagonist, while Walternate is written into an adversarial role. As for much of the character's run, he's very anti-our world. We're dealing with two complex geniuses who believe that what they're doing, at least at the time, is right. The third season is admirably bonkers. It contains both a musical episode and an LSD-induced, largely animated one as well. And I'm not saying that the boldness is depicted through solely gimmicky one-offs or something of the sort. I f***ing adore where the story takes the Liv-Peter relationship. Olivia, before being captured by Walternate and company, professes her affection for Peter. Then, for like a third of this third season, Peter unknowingly shares a romantic relationship with faux Olivia, and we not only learn that the wrong Olivia becomes pregnant with Peter's baby. Once our Liv is returned, we eventually learn that as she attempts to re-engage her romance with him, Peter actually has lingering feelings for the alternate Olivia. The trio of episodic highlights: number 10, The Firefly; number 15, Subject 13; and episode 22, The Day We Died. 310 is mostly contained with an incredibly poignant core. The great Christopher Lloyd guest stars here, and he is so spectacular and memorable. This piece is so sure of what it is. It's a story about grief. It's about the massive ripple effect that Walter's decision, which was fueled by grief, unfortunately caused. Perhaps the greatest strength of this emotional hour is the super special and sweet dynamic between Lloyd and Noble. Subject 13 is the successor to Season 2's Peter, and it may even be slightly superior to that milestone episode. It's exceedingly compelling and quietly tragic to see the aftermath of Peter's essential kidnapping. Orla Brady's Elizabeth, Dr. Bishop's wife, resorts to drinking as a result of the deep guilt caused by her basically brainwashing this alternate Peter into believing he is truly her son. We even get to witness a young Olivia endure Walter's twisted tests. All of the material involving little Liv accidentally teleporting to the parallel universe due to her emotional turmoil is exceptionally executed, and at the time youngster who portrayed little Liv, Carly Scott Collins, delivers an absolutely exceptional performance. The season 3 finale is fittingly wild and fantastic. It twists, it turns, and it leaves you perplexed in an enticed, curious way. This piece gets its very own darkened intro, as the previous episode's cliffhanger sees Peter entering the Doomsday device, which launches his consciousness a decade and a half into the future, at which time the parallel universe has been decimated. It is in this potential future timeline that we find Walternate trying to avenge his shattered universe. He even ruthlessly shoots Olivia in the fucking head. We ultimately, intriguingly learn that the first people, a supposed ancient civilization, is actually a future member or members of the Fringe team, as the pieces of the machine were sent into the distant past via a wormhole. Peter abruptly awakens back inside the machine, but instead of utilizing the Doomsday device to destroy the other world, he instead uses it to somewhat merge the two universes, thereby creating a bridge between them, as Peter explains to everyone that these two worlds are inextricably linked. Then he suddenly vanishes, while everyone remaining within the vast room turn their focus to their respective doppelganger. The two sides agree to cooperate with one another before we see an abundance of observers stationed around the Statue of Liberty, as it is stated that Peter Bishop has been deleted from existence. An awesome season conclusion that presents a plethora of possibilities leading into the show's penultimate season. I really dig season 4, though not as much as the one previous. The series continues to be intriguing and generally bold in regard to the perpetual presence of this newly created alternate timeline, which of course sports its very own intro rendition. I quite like all of the non-existent Peter material within the first few episodes. It's really intriguing, kind of eerie, and Walter is forced to endure that old concept that he can't seem to be rid of: grief. Peter's lack of existence here, basically, shakes things up a bit. He's obviously such a pertinent cog in this Fringe machine, but it never hurts to implement fresh new ideas and see where they take us. I love the fact that we continue to delve deeper into the lore of the Observers, as well as the fact that this 4th season marks the return of the nefarious David Robert Jones and a tangibly present William Bell. One of the mostly contained pieces comes in the form of episode 6, entitled "And Those We've Left Behind." This particular hour contains a concept that, when executed effectively, I'm an absolute sucker for: the theme of letting go. Although we're still dealing with Peter's inexplicable and abrupt return to existence, we primarily focus on the tale of a woman with Alzheimer's, alongside her loyal husband. Stephen Root's Raymond assures there to be a sort of time bubble surrounding he and his lady's home, with the sole purpose of keeping the pair stuck within a specific point in time, in order to avoid the deterioration of Kate's disease. This is certainly well-intentioned, but we learn that the time displacement is causing harm to individuals outside of the bubble. This, of course, on a more minuscule scale, resembles the consequence of Walter, for purely personal reasons, tearing open a hole in time and space. A more so mythology-centric episode highlight comes in the form of 414, The End of All Things. I dig the material involving Jones torturing whom we learn to be Alt-Nina, with the intention of coaxing Olivia's cortexiphan-fueled powers out of her, a bit of a mirror to episode 114, Ability, which I've already discussed. Though the most compelling component within The End of All Things is the plotline focused on Peter entering the mind of Michael Cerverus's Observer, whom we learn is named September. This visually wicked scene between these two is utterly captivating as we delve into the history of these beings, and it is revealed to Peter that he fathered a son named Henry, who ceased to exist following the utilization of the Doomsday device in the season 3 finale. Now, episode 419, entitled Letters of Transit, is certainly not this season's best episode, but it is the most important. This piece doesn't at all fit into the chronology of this 4th season, and there's a specific reasoning behind the positioning of this episode. Season 3 through 5 dealt with ratings that were iffy at best, so it was basically never a guarantee that a subsequent season would be renewed. So Letters of Transit was essentially written as a backdoor pilot to season 5, sort of a pitch to the network and the audience. Long story short, I believe this piece's prominence is due to the fact that it birthed the show's final season, which is unequivocally its strongest. Fringe's final season is so serialized that it's practically one giant 13-part episode, and it is action-packed, overflowing with emotion, and so incredibly satisfying. Although we had already been introduced to, then experienced, such rich themes as fate versus free will, the needs of one versus the needs of many, and the scary and immense power behind the drastic progression of science and technology, this season really zeroed in on what Fringe has really been about all along: protecting our children and assuring the safety of future generations. I've always dug the trio of episodes during which Peter becomes an observer: episodes 6, 7, and 8, Through the Looking Glass and What Walter Found There, 5, 2010, and The Humankind, respectively. I fucking love the action scene in which Observer Peter creatively beats another observer's ass. 507 stylistically concludes with a bit of a montage, fittingly and geniusly featuring one of my all-time favorite tunes, The Man Who Sold the World, performed by the late legendary David Bowie. 52010's final frames chillingly consist of Peter shedding a chunk of hair before sort of tilting his head in Observer-esque fashion. The final scene from The Humankind features more of a rapid-fire montage, but this time around it's part of an exceedingly sweet moment, as Liv lovingly brings Observer Peter back to humanity. An Enemy of Fate is one of my all-time favorite series finales. It is impressively concise and extremely emotionally effective. It serves as a perfectly satisfying end to this 100-episode-long journey. Firstly, this finale is packed with awesome and organic homages to a multitude of past episodes, as our heroes utilize the now controlled Fringe abnormalities that have formerly plagued them against their enemies. We're also given a beautifully impactful encounter between Walter and September/Donald, during which Michael Cerveris expertly delivers a monologue centered on what I referred to earlier as the primary message of the series, though the most poignant aspect of 513 is all of the Bishop material. Mid-ish episode, we're given potentially my favorite scene in Fringe, the You're My Favorite Thing scene, if you will. Via an ambered tape, Peter learns Walter's ultimate plan, though it wasn't a part of Dr. Bishop's plan for him to be present for this viewing. Bishop Sr.'s intention is to take Michael, the observer child, through a wormhole, thereby sending this pair into the distant future, ultimately and essentially healing this time conundrum/paradox. Walter sincerely admits that the time he and Peter spent together, they stole, and he wouldn't trade that for the world, which is powerful, undoubtedly, even more so when you take into account the fact that in order for the pair to steal that time, Walter basically traded a world for his son. This just exemplifies the love Dr. Bishop has for his boy. The embrace shared between Peter and Walter is one of the most heartwarming happenings I've witnessed on television. John Noble and Joshua Jackson absolutely act their asses off here. Then the final goodbye between father and son is fucking beautiful. All of the sounds of the world are muted, apart from the mellifluous and gentle musical score. Then, prior to Peter and Walter permanently departing from one another, we see a particularly emotional Peter mouthing the words, "I love you, Dad." Fringe is this wonderful, underrated sci-fi gem with a big heart at its core. It's constantly creative and compelling, fueled by a collection of excellent performances.